Hello everyone, I am super excited to bring you another literary agent interview today on the Authors and Agents podcast. I have the amazing Claire Harris from PS Literary Agency with me today. She answers awesome query questions, gives a lot of really good advice, and helps you who might be interested in querying her just get to know her a little bit better and what she is looking for. So if you are a querying author, this is an awesome interview for you to listen to. I read some really good books this week, but my favorite, well, I have two favorites. You'll get the next favorite next week. But my favorite this week that I'll choose is Alone by Megan E. Freeman. And Megan will actually be on the podcast in an episode in 2021. But I'm going to talk about her book now because it's just so good. I enjoyed it so much. So her book is actually in verse, so it's poetry, which is not something I read a lot. So I was really excited to read it, and it was amazing. Like, I could not put it down. Let me go ahead and read the blurb for you. When 12-year-old Maddie hatches a scheme for a secret sleepover with her two best friends, she ends up waking up to a nightmare. She's alone, left behind in a town that has been mysteriously evacuated and abandoned. With no one to rely on, no power, and no working phone lines or internet access, Maddie slowly learns to survive on her own. Her only companions are a Rottweiler named George and all the books she can read. After a rough start, Maddie learns to trust her own ingenuity and invents clever ways to survive in a place that has been deserted and forgotten. As months pass, she escapes natural disasters, looters, and wild animals. But Maddie's most formidable enemy is the crushing loneliness she faces every day. Can Maddie's stubborn will to survive carry her through the most frightening experience of her life? It is super well done, and the writing is beautiful. The character that Megan has created is, wonderful and strong, and you want to know what happens, right? I mean, it's a crazy situation to think of anybody in, let alone, a 12-year-old girl. So I definitely recommend Alone by Megan E. Freeman. It comes out on January 12th of 2021, so make sure you pre-order it now. All right, well, that is my favorite book of the week. And now let's go ahead and get to know Claire. Claire, can you tell me what drew you to publishing and being a literary agent?
Yeah, of course. So when I was younger, I always thought I wanted to be an editor at like a newspaper or a magazine or something.
Nice.
That was always the goal for me. And then, throughout high school, I edited papers for my classmates, and I would charge them for it because, why not? And one of my teachers actually suggested that I look into editing as a career. And I was like, that's really good thinking. I'm going to do that. So I went to college at UT Austin, and while I was there, I narrowed it down to book publishing because I was like, what am I doing? I love books. Why do I not want to work in book publishing? And then after college, I did the NYU Summer Publishing Institute. And while I was there, I learned about the responsibilities of an agent. And honestly, as soon as I learned about a little more about agenting, it was all over for me. That was the only goal. I was like, okay, cool. This is my job. This is what I'm doing. So I got an internship with Sterling Lord Literistic for a little while, and then I got an internship at Foundry Literary and Media, and then I was hired a month in and stayed for 4.5 years working various positions there, and then I just recently made the move to PS Literary. But yeah, once I heard of agenting, there was no turning back. I was obsessed. I love being able to have your hand in every aspect of the process. It's you're not just doing one thing, you're doing all of it. And I think, I really love discovering authors and really being their advocate and making sure that they feel supported and that, they have a positive publishing experience in general too.
I think that's awesome. I think, you get kind of the best of all the worlds because you get to have your hand in everything, and you get to, fall in love with the story and be just as passionate, as the author about it and help champion it. And that sounds awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's when I'm passionate about a project, I'm I'm like, okay, like I'm equally as passionate as this author, and like I didn't even write the book. Like,
Right.
This is a great sign. Let's do this.
Yes. And that's almost like better than having to have written the book. Like you just get to fall in love with it after it's mostly done, right? And you still need to probably do some stuff, but like the really hard part is over.
Yeah. I know. I just swoop in, fall in love, and keep going. You know, it's perfect.
There you go. Well, tell me how your love for books began, because it sounds like you have loved books for a long time.
Yeah, so I would say I was always like interested in reading in books, but I really wasn't the biggest reader until college. I think like, you know, I had just always been like super busy and I was involved in a lot of activities. So, you know, once I had a more flexible schedule, it meant so much more time for reading. And then in college, my sister kept giving me books and being like, hey, like, did you read this? Like, oh, I thought of you. I heard about this book. Like, here, read this. And I would just plow through them. So, you know, I was in a new city, Austin, and I was in a new state, Texas, and, you know, I was like making friends, but I was also trying to explore the city. So I would walk for hours and like find a park and just sit in that park and read. And then, you know, that was when I really started like devouring books and like taking classes that would teach me about new authors. But yeah, one of the funniest things about, you know, kind of like hitting my stride in college with all of the reading that I was doing is that on my Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, it became like a running joke that like everyone thought I was like playing a prank on them by bringing a different book every time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So they would be like, oh yeah, you finished that book, did you? And I'd just be like, yeah, of course I finished the book. Like, I'm on to the next one.
Uh-huh.
And it was so funny to just see their reactions because, you know, everyone else was like, what are you just only reading 24/7? I'm like, yeah, kind of, yeah.
I have had people say the exact same thing to me. I remember I was in training for a new job, and it was like a 6-week training, and I would bring a new book like every other day. I can read a book, you know, in like 3 hours, and and I had my trainer be like, what? That's a new book again? Like, what are you doing? And it's just like, right? Yeah, I just...
People are like, how do you do that?
Yeah. You're just like, I just read. I mean, instead of watching the TV or, you know, staring at going through my Explore on my Instagram, like, just read a book.
Exactly. Just read a book. It's amazing.
So much better.
That's like my motto, because that's what I constantly tell everyone. Just read a book. It's amazing.
Just read a book. It's amazing. And it really is.
It really is.
I love it. I think that's great. I'm glad the book bug found you and led you to where you are now.
Yeah, me too.
That's great. Well, Claire, let's get into some query questions, because I know people love having agents' feedback and kind of their tips on these. So my first question for you is, do you think queries need to stick to the specified formula? Now, that's not like your agency's submission guidelines, but, you know, the basic query formula of like who, what, the stakes, and, you know, cliffhanger, like the blurb part of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's really helpful to stick to that formula. You know, at least for me, like, we get so many submissions, and it really helps to have like some like semblance of like continuity, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it helps to have everything is kind of like, it's easier to digest and read them in bulk when they're all following like a certain formula.
Yeah.
And it just makes making decisions a little bit easier, because we are getting so many queries. You know, and like, it's a risky move to try something like totally out there.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, in my case, if anyone listening to this is querying me, it doesn't really pay off for me to do something totally out there. You know, I like having a standard, like, specific formula that people are following. Yeah, but I think it's also, you know, you're writing it as if it's, you know, you're writing it as if it's like the cover copy for the book. And I think the fun thing is that, you know, if you write a good query letter and I end up signing you, I might use your query letter or part of your query letter as my pitch to editors. And then if the editor likes it, like, that is actually what becomes your jacket copy. So
that's
it's
awesome.
kind of cool, but yeah, I would just say try to follow the formula if you can. It just makes things a little easier on us, and that's always helpful.
I think that's very helpful. I think the mindset behind some of those like gimmicky ones is like, oh, what you said is you see so many a day. They're like, this will break it up and catch their attention. But I think that could almost be more jarring to have one that's like so different. It would be confusing when you've been reading a bunch of them that go along the same, format.
I think jarring is like the perfect word to describe it, because sometimes I'll get a query that's so like out of the norm that I'm just like taken aback for a second. I'm like, whoa, like what did I just read? And then I have to read it a couple times to like really process like what's going on, and then it's like it slows me down, and ultimately if it's something I'm not going to sign, then I'm like, okay, I need to just move on from it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think that is a good advice, and hopefully the people who are listening know now when they're querying you to not be gimmicky. Yeah. My next query question, I'd love to know what your number one query no-no is.
Yeah, so this kind of goes with my last answer, but like an overly voicey query letter, it just feels really inauthentic to me a lot of the time, and almost like a little like, I guess hokey is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I don't know. It can be a turnoff if it's not like super clear and super compelling as well, because it's like, it really is a sales document. And I know that's kind of a weird way to look at things, but, as someone who like, I'm not an author myself, but when I'm pitching people's books, I look at like that pitch letter as a sales document.
Yeah.
And like, if it's a proposal, it's a sales document. I need to make sure that I'm able to sell this to someone else. And, if it doesn't have the right information in there, and it's not like compelling and clear and concise, then it makes my job a lot harder, because I'm like, okay, I can't even figure out like what they're pitching me, and but yeah, and I just appreciate when they're like when they're well done and well written. But yeah, I would say for me the number one is when it's like super, super voicey.
I think that the point that it's a sales document is something that writers who maybe are doing this for the first time, right, starting to query, have to realize that as they move into the query process and wanting an agent and wanting their book published, that it is a business, that they're changing lanes a little bit from this project that maybe has just been their like little baby, that their passion project changes into a business once you enter all these new elements into it. And I think sometimes people too, I feel like I've seen it on Twitter recently about people questioning how important voice is in a query, and staying true to the voice that's in their manuscript and their query. So that's a good note to think about too, that it really, what's at the heart of the query is, like what you said, a sales document, but also just wanting you to read more. Oh, shoot, you're fine. Shoot. But just wanting you to read more and not,
Right.
Again,
yeah,
I feel
like the whole point of a query letter is to make me be like, that's intriguing enough that like I'm sold. I want to read the rest of it, and then I read your passion project. Right. So, yeah, exactly. It's like the query letter itself is a sales document, but I'm not saying your manuscript is a sales document. Like, right. I'm saying like, you have to sell people on reading your passion,
right. Definitely. I think that's a good note to make. So what in the first pages that people send you, what are things in those first pages that you encounter will make you stop reading?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are so many things, but I'll just name a few things that I can think of. So obviously, like the most obvious ones are, if anything's offensive or if anything makes me uncomfortable, I'll stop. So like examples, like if there's like something that feels racist, or right. if there is like a graphic sexual assault scene, like that's not for me.
That's hard to start with.
yeah, that's like, I kind of like draw the line there. Obviously, I'm like, okay, like I'm going to put this way. That's not for me.
Yeah.
And some people are different and they can look past things, but you know, that's like a personal preference. It's like not for me. You know, if it's not engaging, or if I feel uninterested in the characters, I'll probably stop. If I don't like the writing, I'll stop. If it's confusing to the point where I honestly am not sure like what's happening, I'll stop.
Yeah.
And that's one that happens to me a lot, you know, like people are trying to do too much too quickly.
First pages are hard.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say first pages are hard, and I feel like it definitely takes a while to be able to hone in how to make those first pages engaging and pull someone in without confusing them completely, right?
Totally, exactly. Yeah. And then, you know, other things are like, for thrillers, especially if it's like way too predictable, I'll stop. Or one that kind of is a little bit obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, is if it's a genre I don't represent, I'll stop.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I get a lot of people who query me, and I'm not sure like where they got the idea that I was representing that kind of book, and I'm like, okay, I have to be more clear with my like intention and more clear what I'm telling people I'm interested in, you know. But I think it's also a good reminder that like you really should research on the agents that you're sending things to, because, you know, like at this moment I don't do like young adult, children's, middle grade, but I do get submissions for those sometimes. And, you know, then you're kind of just sending it like out into the void because it's not something that I'm going to read. So that's just something to like, a little tip, but a tip tangent, but yeah, but honestly, it's a lot about just like personal preference for all of these things that would make me stop reading, you know, and for other people it might be totally different, but like for me, those are some things that will make me not be as interested in a manuscript and maybe like put it down and possibly forever.
I think those are good things for people to know, just overall, but also if anybody, you know, is interested in you and doing their research on you, that's good information. And I think your tip tangent is so important because I feel like there are a lot of people out there with queries that are just like, I want to get this done. I want to send it out and I want to have all my queries done, and then just, you know, but it's so important to put the research in and to not just blindly email every email address you can find.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, also like, it's such an important relationship, you and your agent, and you don't want to like start it off on a weird foot where you're like, you know, they're like, oh great, I'm so glad you sent this to me. You're like, yeah, I actually don't remember sending it to you because I blasted it out to so many people, but you know what I mean? Like, you want it, it's like, it's a personal thing. And, you know, yes, it is like a business like we were talking about, but it's also like a very personal business.
Yes.
So, you know, you want to make this connection with them and you want to be like, wow, this person has done books that I admire. And, you know, this is why I want to submit to this person. It's like my comp titles are 2 titles they represented, you know? So yeah, I think the research part is so important, and I think sometimes people overlook that a little bit, and I think it can be really helpful.
Yes, it can be really helpful, and I think they overlook it because querying can be so like heart-wrenching at times for people.
Yeah,
right?
And it can be super overwhelming.
Yes.
Like, you know, I totally get that.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll see tweets from people talking about like being overwhelmed by querying, and I'm always like, I feel you, and I'm like, I know I don't feel you, but like I do feel you. Like
you're on the other end of it, and I can imagine too it's overwhelming to get all the queries and have to go through them and like have to make those decisions.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's hard, like, you know, thinking of like how many times like I have to send out like rejection letters or, you know, things like that. But just know, like, we do understand, like, we're people too, and we understand it's hard and rejection sucks. And, you know, agenting is an industry that there is a lot of rejection built into the job. You know, you're sending projects to editors and you're getting rejections, or you are talking to an author and you're trying to sign them and they go with someone else, or, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of rejection on all ends of the publishing industry. So
yes,
there's one thing we all can come together on. It's that rejection sucks.
It does suck. It sucks for all of us, no matter what side you're looking at it from.
Exactly.
Well, my next question is more positive. I'd love to know what your favorite thing to see in a query is. What are those things that just get you really excited?
Yeah, definitely. Number one for me is comp titles.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a good comp just makes me, like, perk up, take notice. I'm like, okay, let's get going on this. That is really interesting. And I love when it's like, you know, it's X meets Y. Like, it's a little dramatic to phrase it that way, but I kind of love that drama.
I love that.
Yeah, but and then like some advice on that to people is just like, you know, pick books with good sales or popular TV shows or movies. You know, something that has some traction that's like having a moment in like pop culture.
Yeah.
Because if you pick something super obscure, like, yes, there's a chance that I'll be like, oh yes, I know of that very obscure like thing that you're referencing. But at the same time, that's not like a great sign. You know, you want to pick comp titles that are more well known. Obviously, nothing that's like too much of like a titan of the industry kind of thing. But yeah, I think like finding that sweet spot of like really solid sales and you know, or like hitting bestseller lists, like things like that, is really helpful. And it's great for me to read a query and be like, oh, this, like, X meets Y. I was just talking about how I was looking for something kind of like Y, and I love X, so that's perfect. Yeah, but otherwise, apart from comp titles, like, it's a little hard to describe what I love, like, seeing in a query, because it's honestly more than anything, like, it's a feeling that you get, you know? And it's funny, like, I'm asked this question a lot by friends where they're like, how do you know when you like something if you're just like reading a query or you're just reading a sample? Like, how do you know? And I was actually talking to one of my best friends about this like a few days ago, and my explanation was like in emojis, because I find the weirdest ways to describe like how this is a feeling to me. So, you know, I was like, oh yes, for rom-coms, like I want to be that super, super smiley guy with like the like closed eyes and he has hearts all around him and he's so happy. And everyone was like, okay. And then, you know, for thrillers, I want like those like disembodied eyes that are like looking off to the side, like sort of like, oh, hello, like what's going on, kind of creeping. You know, like stuff like that. So I found that that's like a fun way for me to explain it to people, but
but on the other end, it's like that's a hard. You're like, okay, how do I make her achieve the emoji eyes?
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's a fun way to put it, though, and I'm sure it is, you know, a feeling, and that's the thing about querying. You know, like you have to connect with it. And it's hard to know what you will connect with or not, I would think, on some, you know, kind of day by day, depending on what's in your inbox.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like, you know, I'm reading so many queries, and like if there's one that jumps out that I'm like, ooh, I really connect with this one, I'll definitely be interested in it. But, you know, there are also ones where it kind of like, it interests you enough that you want to read more, but you know, maybe the query, like, didn't jump out as, like, emoji with hearts around it, you know?
Well, awesome. I hope that people who are listening, they know in their minds that they're like, oh, I have something that's going to give her those emoji hearts.
I know, they're probably like, oh, that was a strange description, but I think my manuscript does that.
Yes. My last query question, I'd love to know what your tips or your golden rules would be for authors who are querying right now.
Definitely, yeah, that's a really good question. Number one is just follow instructions on the website. You know, every agency is like slightly different, but just make sure you're like addressing to the right person, because you know, it can get lost in the shuffle very easily. And then one piece of advice that I give people a lot is to take your query letter, get it into as good of shape as you can, and then give it to someone to review, but someone who you have never talked to about your book. Say nothing to them beforehand and have them read it and be like, you know, do you want to read more of that? Would you be interested in reading that? And the reason I give that advice is because that is literally the situation you're going to be putting yourself into when you're querying.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, so it's like, if you're querying me, like, I have never heard about your book before, probably. I mean, possibly I have, but, you know, I've probably never talked to you. I've probably never had you pitch me your book, and I'm just going to blindly get this letter. So that's a good way for you to kind of, like, you know, test the waters of, like, is this, like, catchy enough, but, like, also does it give away too much? And, you know, like, is it something that people would want to read more of? Yes, that's, like, a piece of, like, advice that people can actually, like, follow. And then otherwise, like, my other advice is just, like, don't be too hard on yourself and don't take rejection too hard, because publishing is super subjective and there are so many reasons to reject something. But just because one person, like, doesn't want to represent it doesn't mean that it's bad, and doesn't mean that everyone's going to feel the same.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think that's just something, like, it's obvious advice, but it's also something to keep in mind, because, you know, especially right now, we're all very stressed, and I think it's important that no one, you know, puts too much pressure on themselves for something, especially something that, you know, is, like, out of their control. You know, like, you've done your work, you've done everything you can, you've sent it out. Now you need to let us come back to you with responses, and just try to, like, stay calm.
And that can be such a hard thing. I'm a control freak, I would say. I love to be in control of everything that I possibly can. So that, you know, I can imagine for some people, they're like, no, I can't let that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I think too, to your point that, you know, if one agent doesn't like it, it doesn't mean that there isn't one out there. I think too, there is also a good point that maybe at this time, right, like, you know, it's not possible or isn't going to happen that your book is sold right at this time, but maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year. Because I have, you know, some friends who, just based on the story that they have or the genre, you know, it's maybe there's too much in that category right now, or not enough. And so it unfortunately is all about timing in that respect too.
Exactly. And it's like, you know, don't let one rejection, like, turn you off of publishing, you know, like, it's still a great thing. If you've written something, you want to get it published, you should still keep working towards that. Don't let anything, like, discourage you, you know?
Yeah.
Because yeah, exactly like what you said, like, maybe the timing just wasn't right. And then maybe you query someone else in 6 months and the timing's perfect, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, I'm the most impatient person in the world, and I know a lot of other writer friends of mine are too. I feel like that's, like, a trait a lot of us have in common, which is publishing is the worst industry probably for us, but maybe we all just need to be taught how to be patient.
Yeah. Maybe someone should write a book about it.
There you go. I would love to know what else you look for in an author when you've... One second. Hold on. Little goose. What else you look for in an author? You've read their manuscript, you're super excited, and you're on that call. What are some other things that you're considering when you're chatting with them?
Yeah, totally. So the first thing that I'm always, like, keenly aware of is our vibe together, like, how we get along. It's actually really important. You know, it's ideally going to be a long-lasting relationship, and I'm going to be with them, like, throughout their career. So I want people who are, you know, like, we get along well. I don't want any, like, tension or, you know, anyone who seems like they don't trust me to do my job for them, you know. So yeah, the second point is the trust there. That's definitely a big one for me. And then third, like, you know, are they flexible and willing to work with edits? That's a big one, because even though I might not have a lot of edits for them at this first stage, like, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But even if I don't, at some point, someone is going to need them to edit something. And if they are unwilling to edit, it's going to make for a difficult it's just going to make for a difficult experience. And, you know, they might be really unhappy then. And that's like the one thing I'm trying to avoid is like having my authors be unhappy with their publishing experience.
Yeah.
Another thing I look for is, you know, I want career authors. So I'm always looking, like asking my people on phone calls, like, you know, do you have a vision for your career? Like, do you have future works you're thinking of? Like, what's your brand? How can we make a book that fits into that brand?
Yes.
And, you know, yeah, so I think that's like really important. People who are open to hearing like new book ideas is always nice too. It's not like exactly necessary, but you know, sometimes I'll go to people and I'll say like, hey, I really think you should write a book on this. Like, do you want to talk about it? And then, you know, we can kind of go from there. But that's not like necessary. I do that like even more so with nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then like another thing that's not necessarily like needed, but it's a plus, is if the person is really good at communicating about their book in like a concise and interesting way, that's always a plus, because it means we're going to have good calls with editors. It'll be helpful for publicity later on. You know, it'll be great for how they're going to promote their book. It's always a good skill to have. And if you don't have the skill, try to fake it. But, but yeah, and then I'm always interested to see like platform information, but again, that's not a deal breaker for me. I just am always interested, you know, like,
yeah,
what platforms are you using, and do you have a website and things like that.
I think those are such good things to share and for people to consider as they, you know, start to look for a literary agent, because I think that call and the whole process of finding an agent, you guys are both interviewing each other. It's not just you trying to figure out if the, you know, the author is good for you, but also the author trying to figure out if you're good for them, because it is, you know, a two-way relationship. So it is good for people to understand kind of what everybody's looking for.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like it will end up being one of your most important relationships.
Yes.
And you need someone that you feel comfortable with and that you trust, because, you know, if something goes wrong and you're like, I don't even know like where to begin, like what happened, like, you know, you need to be able to go to your agent and say like, this happened, like, what do we do? And then the agent will be like, okay, here's what we're going to do, you know, come up with a game plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to me, is like, do I like vibe with the person?
Because you got to have good vibes. Nobody needs more bad vibes in their life.
I do not need any bad vibes right
now. No, none of us do. Get all the bad vibes out of here.
I love it.
Well, Claire, could you tell me a little bit about what's on your manuscript wish list? I know people can go and look this up, but what are some things that you're excited and looking for?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited about rom-coms right now, especially ones that are like heavier on the com and like a little lighter on the rom, you know, like sprinkle that rom on top. But yeah, and then I'm always looking for thrillers, mysteries, cozies, you know, especially like psychological thrillers. And then I am looking for contemporary fiction with like really solid writing. I love family dramas, so I would love to do more of those. Yeah, and then I'm always looking for stories representing areas that are like overlooked. So I don't remember if I've mentioned this, but I'm from Wisconsin, and it's a place that is often overlooked. And so I really, really like to read stories about places like that. Always looking for diverse voices and own voices stories and things like that. And then in terms of nonfiction, like some fun self-help with like really tangible advice, true crime, cultural critiques, lifestyle guides, humor, gifty books, that kind of thing. So I'm a little bit all over the place, it would seem, but it's because I just have a lot of interests, and, you know, that's like the best part about agenting is like, you know, you don't have to narrow yourself down to only doing one thing.
Right.
You can be interested in love and murder, and, you know, it's fine.
I love it. And I love that you're, you know, seeking stuff that stories that take places in places maybe other than Maine, because I've read
Yeah.
so many books that are in Maine, and Maine is amazing, don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on it, but it is, I love it when I read a book and it's somewhere that is different, that I haven't read this, you know, in that same area of the world over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like I do tweet frequently about like my manuscript wish list, so yeah, if anyone like wants to check out my Twitter for that, it's just Claire_M_Harris.
Perfect.
So yeah, you can always follow me on there and just like take a look at my manuscript wish list tweets.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that, Claire. I have one last question for you. I have been told time and time again it is my hardest question. I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. Not your favorite book of all time, because that's a silly question, but just a book you've read recently that you really loved.
I will also agree that is a very hard question. No, but I love it. I have been reading a lot of rom-coms lately because they have been making my heart happy.
Yes.
And in the past year, two that like I've read that have really stuck out to me were Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Oh, so
and
good.
then also Love at First Like. So
Love at First
I just thought
Like.
both of them were like so cute, and they just made me so happy. Like, you know what I mean? So those two really stuck out, but there's a ton of other ones too. I don't know, I've been using my Instagram page. I like just created one like probably earlier this year, I think, that I've been using to like show people books I've been reading, but also like why I would want a book kind of in that vein. So yeah, that's also a good way to, I guess I should have mentioned this when I mentioned my manuscript wish list, but that's also a good way to keep up with my manuscript wish list is on Instagram. So the handle for that is just Reads by Claire. But that is one where I'll post about like a book and be like, I really enjoyed this book, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll be like, you know, a few lines later, I'm like, I would love a book like this, and here's exactly what I liked about it and why I would represent this book or something similar.
Awesome.
So, yeah, just kind of like, I found that to be like a fun way to, spread the word, and like I love taking pictures of books. Who doesn't?
Oh my gosh, Claire, I do that all day long. I just take pictures of books. I know Instagram loves faces, but I think that it should just love books more.
It should only love books.
Yes,
like, faces have had their time.
They have. We don't need to look at faces anymore, just books. Well, awesome. Thank you for sharing that with me. I have yet to read Red, White, and Royal Blue, but I have had literally so many people on this tell me that it's their favorite book. So it's in my Amazon shopping cart right now, and I'm gonna buy it. Although
please do. So good.
Although nothing's being delivered here because of the air quality, but hopefully that'll change at some point.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely, I highly recommend reading that one. It was so fun and funny and cute, and awesome. It was the whole package.
Good. It gave you the emoji feelings.
I had like multiple emojis of that feeling. So
good. Claire, thank you so much for chatting with me and answering all my query questions. It has been such a blast chatting with you. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Authors and Agents with Rose Quinn. I hope that you enjoyed and learned something from Claire, and for those of you who want to query her, probably best to wait till January, right? Like that's the good advice, to not query right before the holidays. But once January comes, query her, give her all your good stuff. As always, if you could please rate and review this podcast wherever you're listening, that is so helpful to me. If you can't rate and review it on the platform you're listening on, then post about it on Instagram or Twitter. Tag me. Let's chat. I love to hear from you guys. But otherwise, you guys will get a new episode next week.